evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today is March 1st, 2023, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, as always, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford. How are you, Nigel?
Hello again. I'm good.
And we've got the always sunny Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan. How are you, Cory?
I'm happy to the core of my being, as you can tell.
You're always just you come in, you illuminate the office with your presence when you come in, and that's great. All right, we got a good show today. We had no trouble coming up with topics for today. Sometimes we're like, I don't know. It's pretty unambiguous today. So at our in our morning news meeting today, we had I hadn't seen it, but on global news yesterday, Alberta Finance Minister Travis Toews said that an independent Alberta police force was off the table. No Alberta police force. And, well, that's news to me, and I think most Albertans who thought they heard Danielle Smith and Travis Toews say they support an Alberta police force and they're running for the leadership of the United Conservative Party. And there's been some back and forth and clarifications and statements from the government since, but let's just say it's worrying. And boy, that landed like a stink bomb at the morning news meeting this morning. Eh, Nigel?
Certainly did.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things...
We're not getting into it yet. I'm setting up the show.
Oh!
Okay.
Well,
we're eager.
It landed like a stink bomb.
It landed like a stink bomb. I was just looking for... that's right, Derek. But that came just a few hours after the finance minister tabled the Alberta budget. And boy, she's a big budget. It's a surplus, which is nice, but a lot of that surplus getting spent away in pre-election spending. See my face for shock and horror and surprise. So we're going to talk about the Alberta budget, what it means, what it looks like, and it could have been any better. And we're going to finish off with we're going to try and answer the question: are the Liberals compromised by China? Spoiler: yes, they are. They're but we're going to get into it because this is really building up. How long can the Liberals drag their heels and resist calls for a public inquiry on Chinese interference in Canadian elections and politics? Before we get on, though, I want to thank my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I've been a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association for well over a decade because I trust them with my membership dues to protect my rights as a firearms owner. They haven't even paid for a sponsorship. We're going to have to go to them for money. But the big Canadian gun show, the Calgary Gun Show is coming up. We were talking about around the newsroom today. We're obviously going to be there. I always go and buy at least something. There's always such cool stuff there. We were there together last year. If you are a firearms owner in Canada, you absolutely need to be a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They are the organization that is doing the most in Canada to defend your rights as a firearms owner to ensure the government doesn't steal your property. So if you're not yet a member, go to cssa-cila.org or do what I do, just Google them and join today. It's money very well spent. Okay, so this kind of works in actually with firearms. The talk around an Alberta Provincial Police Force. It's been talked about for a long time. This goes back to the firewall letter. For a very brief time, roughly 100 years ago, Alberta really briefly had its own police force. Ontario and Quebec have their own police forces. Ontario is well-known separatist province. They have a police force. That means that they're going to declare independence from themselves very soon. But then, this picked up steam with the firewall letter around 2001. This was a recommendation of the Fair Deal panel struck by Jason Kenney to try and make all the sovereigntists calm down. The government didn't really do much on it, just had some studies. And during the UCP leadership race to replace Jason Kenney, Danielle Smith campaigned on the creation of an Alberta police force, moving away from the RCMP controlled by Ottawa. And her main opponent, Travis Toews, also supported an independent Alberta police force. Now we fast forward to yesterday in the rotunda of the legislature. Finance Minister Travis Toews is being interviewed by Dale Smith, a reporter at Global Edmonton. And he said, there's no money in the budget for the police force. Does this mean it's off the table? Travis Toews spent about 30 seconds not answering the question, saying, our priorities are safety, doing the kind of the political runaround. And then the reporter, to his credit, put it right back to him. He says, is an Alberta police force off the table? And Travis Tate says, yes, it's off the table. There's no money budgeted for it, blah, 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 blah. So, we talked about, this came to my attention, most of our attention during the morning news meeting today when our Edmonton reporter, Arthur Green, brought this up. And boy, she landed like a stink bomb. I just, immediately I said, well, that's our priority for the day. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Since then, I know you've talked to Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis, and what did they say?
So what they are saying is that he misspoke.
The finance minister misspoke.
The finance minister misspoke. They haven't come out and said it is still on the table, but on the basis that if a statement saying it wasn't is misspeaking, I guess it's still there. But here's what worries me about this. You get elected, you start to find out where the money is going, and you think, holy mackerel, where do we find some money? Oh, maybe we don't need to do this, or maybe we don't need to do it yet. But that is totally the wrong approach for this government. Danielle Smith was elected leader on that promise, among a number of others, and it's part of the suite that establishes Alberta's position regarding Ottawa. If you don't have that, what happens when the RCMP are ordered by Ottawa to go and pick up firearms, for example? Do you want that kind of federal force embedded in your own province forever when we have the alternative of doing this, which was campaigned on, was supported widely among the leadership candidates, and people are now expecting it? And then suddenly, water cooler conversation, I guess it's off the table. No, let it not be off the table. They've got to bring this back quick. I'm looking for a statement from the Premier that this is on the table forever.
So I think I'd say, it's probably reassuring to, those of us who'd like to see an independent Alberta police force that it's not off the table, but they didn't say it's directly on the table. It's left it in kind of a state of political purgatory, I think. So what they said is they're building out the sheriffs. There was an announcement in Grand Prairie recently where the sheriffs are going to be built out to kind of take over the regional policing in that area. And I think what they're trying to telegraph indirectly is, well, we're not getting rid of the RCMP and replacing it with an Alberta police force, but we're going to build up the sheriffs as sort of an Alberta police force as an option for different communities, and they can contract either one. And I don't know. How are you reading it, Corey?
Yeah, it's about it. I think they're taking a piecemeal approach rather than taking the fuss that would come with trying to change the whole system at once. The other thing is, with an election pending, they just don't want the battle on that front when they got 100 others going. But that said, 4 years ago, a very popularly elected premier came into office with a strong majority mandate, and he screwed us on the provincial police, on the Fair Deal panel, and all that backpedaling. And where is he today? Mm-hmm. Premier Smith would be very well served to understand that there will be very little patience for seeing no movement on the things she campaigned on to get into the leadership position. So she'd best clarify this very soon, because she doesn't want to be losing internal support when an election's coming, or be kicked out of the party after the election, because people will do it again. They're not going to put up with that anymore. That we've saw it too recently.
No Alberta Conservative premier has even completed a term since Klein's second last election, 2001 to 2004. That was the last, 2001 to 2004 is the last time a Conservative premier even finished a term. The last premier of Alberta, period, to leave of their own accord was Peter Lougheed in the mid-'80s. So I think they're trying to thread the needle, minimize points of controversy here. But the main point, there's several points for getting rid of the RCP. One is, an Alberta police force would probably be more reactive to our needs, maybe provide better services. One of the really big ones is that we don't have agents of Ottawa stationed on our soil executing the will of Ottawa. So things like firearms, they're piloting the confiscation programs in Prince Edward Island right now. And depending on how that goes, they're going to move it across the country. They're going to try and learn the lessons in PEI and then launch it elsewhere. It'd be really difficult for Justin Trudeau to start stealing people's firearms in Alberta if he's got no police on the ground here to do it. And if it goes the way, again, we don't know exactly the way it's going, but it looks like it's just going to kind of be a patchwork of sheriffs and RCMP. That still leaves the RCMP stationed on Alberta soil, able to execute the will of Ottawa at Trudeau's command. I don't know. Do you think is this the politically smart move, Nigel, in the advance of an election, or is this probably going to set us up for more trouble?
Well, I dare say they think it's a politically smart move in advance of the election. It enables them to deploy the money that would have been committed to this elsewhere, and they kind of hope that people won't notice it. I mean, it's Travis Taves, the day of he's just presented his budget. Everybody's talking about the budget. Somebody asks him about the police force. Now it's off the table. If you were going to say that, that would be the time to say it when attention is elsewhere. But he did say it, and we want to bring attention back on that because that is one of the key points.
He did try to put attention on it. He tried to intentionally downplay this. There was no mention in the budget that they're not going ahead with an Alberta police force. Mm-hmm. He was asked the question by a journalist who, to his credit, I don't see money for it. He asked him a question about it. Taves didn't answer the question. He danced all around it, and then he put the question back to him, and then he said, it's off the table. So clearly they weren't trying to telegraph this in a very public way. This was supposed to be quiet, but I don't think it is anymore. Cory, do you think, I don't know, should we just pray this is a hidden agenda and that, election's over and then they're saying, Alberta Police Force is on. Here's the Alberta Rangers or whatever we call it.
That's kind of how I said it in my show in a sense, but it's unfortunate though. It's such a disingenuous way to get something done if that's the way it has to be. And I don't like seeing it done that way. I mean, win on what you came and as I said as well, don't forget who brung you in when it comes to the dance thing, because it will bite you. Even at least make a statement and say, we're going to work on it. We're just not working on it until post-election. I mean, it's a little more honest, and the Hornets will swirl for a week, and you know what? It'll phase. But if you're going to sit here and make it look like that it's bait and switch like Premier Kenney did, I don't think it's going to pay off.
I don't see whose vote they're saving in doing this, because Smith is on the record probably 100 times saying there should be an Alberta police force. Travis Taves is on the record a bunch of times. Jason Kenney even said that there should be. He just didn't do anything about it. I mean, they can't plausibly deny that this is something they want to do. Like, their fingerprints are all over it. It's not like, liberals always accuse conservatives, you're going to ban abortion. And conservatives like, find a single statement where I said that. And the left can't. And they try to make that stick. In this case, Smith, Taves, they can't deny that their fingerprints are on this issue. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. I just don't see how they're going to hide from it. I want to dovetail this in. I've got a column that came out today focused on this, but kind of dealing with kind of some of the other broken or watered down promises of the government since Smith came to power. It began with the Sovereignty Act. A Sovereignty Act, as was originally envisioned by Smith when she put it out there, was, let's say, robust, to say the least, revolutionary, if you will. And, then you had all of the UCP leadership candidates, save Todd Lowen, denouncing it, saying it's terrible. You had Jason Kenney coming after it. And then she kind of really soft pedaled it and let's just say took some of the bloodier teeth out of it. And then what got passed even had a different name, the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, and it was watered down. So something was passed, but it wasn't really what people had expected it to be. And then there was, Smith had promised that she was going to amend the Human Rights Act to put the right to refuse mandatory vaccination from the government in there. That was totally scrapped. There's been a number of these kind of big leadership campaign promises that she made that seem to have gotten lost. And I don't know if that is her climbing. There's what the reasons are for climbing down. I think a lot of it is that she was dealing with a largely hostile caucus. It was still, half that caucus was still roughly Kenney's guys, and they were very angry about her winning. So I don't know. Start with you, Cory. Is there how big a risk is there in Smith in kind of watering these things down? Is it risking losing the base and her credibility as the fearless kind of unconventional politician, or is that going to be compensated for by being seen as more moderate and reasonable by centrist voters?
I don't know. She's got a juggling act, as you said. I mean, there are some elements in caucus. The last thing she needs is, with an election pending in a few months, is suddenly to have a few MLAs go rogue and start, publicly infighting. We know how devastating that was to the UCP before, too. And I think a lot of why the UCP support was plummeting wasn't just an unpopularity of Premier Kenney, but it looked like he had no control of his government. If people don't see a government in control, they get uncomfortable, they move away. So she does have to be cognizant of how those caucus members feel who got elected on more of the soft stance with Kenney. But at the same time, I mean, she's leading in a province with, as we pointed out, a long and storied history of firing our premiers if they don't listen to us. So all I can say is I can understand why they're doing it. I don't know what their intent, though, whether it's a permanent scrapping or a hidden agenda, but they just best tread very, very carefully, because this could really blow up, and she could be just another one that comes and goes in a short period of time. So,
Nigel, I know you had a column, I think, just yesterday dealing with the budget. Came out right after the budget there. It was talking about just a lot of this is maybe just kind of political necessity. We're going to hold off on the budget itself, actually, for a second. Kind of the broader pattern of these either broken or watered down promises. Do you think there's much risk for Smith in this, or do you think, people are just kind of buck it up, get through the election because the NDP is the threat, and she doesn't really have to worry about bleeding support from people who might be a bit disillusioned by it?
Well, I think her biggest challenges would come after a successful election.
Yeah.
These people would be stupid to take their divisions public now. That's not to say there aren't some stupid people, but I think if you want to get reelected in your own seat, never mind see the government itself reelected, just keep quiet until May the 30th. If Smith wins with a substantial majority, obviously that will strengthen her hand. If she's hanging on there by 2 votes, then the wingnut factions within that party are going to be very, very hard for her to handle. There's constantly going to be the threat. Well, if you don't do this, then we're going to, create a situation that you can't handle. So I think
so far the rebellious side of the party has been the more establishment Kennyite side of the party. That's the side that's been revolting. We had, we've confirmed already that there was significant movement in one constituency, Rimbey Rocky Mountain House Senator, to reopen the nomination there. They had used dirty tricks to get Jason Nixon, Kenney's right-hand man, acclaimed as the candidate. The party refused to allow anyone to cast a ballot in the nomination in that constituency to protect Kenney's guy, who was facing likely defeat to a guy named Tim Hoven. And that got Nixon's board got completely voted out, replaced by a new board that wants a nomination. Half the UCP's Central Alberta board was up for election at their least recent convention. Every single one of those spots was won by people who wanted to see that nomination reopened. But then there was a revolt in caucus. Nixon had successfully gotten some others together. Apparently some who don't even necessarily like Nixon and back him, but they were worried that, well, what if my nomination comes back into question? So Smith had a whole caucus revolt over this stuff. And it's mostly been coming from kind of the Kennyite faction. That seems to be where, which is funny because it's the opposite side that was rebelling against Kenney. Kenney had more of the wild roser populist wing coming after him. It's now the more traditionalist PC and Kennyite wing that's coming there. So I don't know. Do you think it'd be the more hardcore right wing to be her problem after the next election?
No, I don't. I mean, only in the sense that, Danielle, why aren't you more hardcore right wing? That would be and she would probably welcome that pressure from the right to give her something to work with against the others who clearly are not pulling very hard on the same.
But that pressure took Kenney down.
Yeah, but she'd find that Kenney found it hard to listen to that point of view. Danielle Smith does not find it hard to listen to it and say the right thing to that constituency.
Okay, well, we're going to turn it not very far. We're going to turn it right into the budget. Yes. So yesterday, as we said, Travis Taves, the finance minister, tabled the Alberta budget. It is a surplus, $2.4 billion, driven mostly by higher non-renewable resource revenues, but I think a little bit of let's give a little credit where credit's due. Under Kenny and Taves, who was the finance minister, also under Kenny, they had limited growth in spending. They didn't cut spending. Spending is higher today than it was under the NDP, but as a percentage of GDP and per capita, those on that kind of scale, it's lower because the population's up, inflation's up. Some combination of restraining growth in spending and an increase in revenues. We've got a balanced budget. They have introduced balanced budget legislation, which is nice. Once upon a time, I worked at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. We always liked that stuff. But in time, I don't know. I think this stuff is kind of gimmicky because, a government passes a bill saying, in the future, we're not allowed to do this. We're not allowed to run a deficit. But you know what happens every time anything goes wrong? They amend the legislation or they repeal the legislation. So Alberta had balanced budget legislation under Ralph Klein. And, as soon as anything went wrong, Ed Stelmach amended it. And things continued to go wrong. And Alison Redford amended it several times. Prentice amended it. And then Rachel Notley amended it several more times. And so this stuff seems to be pretty toothless. BC used to have a balanced budget law that if the government ran a deficit, the cabinet had to take a pay cut. Well, they ran deficits for quite a while. You know how many years they took a pay cut? Not a one. Not 1 year did they take the pay cut. So governments always amend this stuff. So maybe before we get into the overall budget, maybe we'll just talk about the balanced budget legislation stuff. Start with Cory. Balanced budget legislation, good and useful, or nice and symbolic but ultimately useless?
That's the second answer. It's just a gimmick. It looks nice. It shows a degree of commitment. Does make it a little more embarrassing if and when you have to repeal it to go into deficit.
Mm-hmm.
That was I spoken on it earlier. The first time I'd ever actually got to see it in the gallery in the legislature was when Stelmach shamefully with his caucus just kind of quickly before the budget came in. They waited right till budget day. Quick motion, popped in, repealed the balanced budget legislation, and while the room was still settling, then they tabled the budget. So, I mean, there's not much to it. It's just a gesture, but it's at least it's a gesture. You wouldn't see one like that from the NDP. I'll give it that.
So, Nigel, today I was having a chat with Chris Sims. She's the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, job I used to have. Mm-hmm. And we were having exactly this conversation. She says, I love it. Balanced budget legislation. And I said, it's gimmicky. They just amended to repeal it whenever it's in trouble. She says, yeah, if they do, we'll give them hell. I said, yeah. And I gave Redford and Prentice hell. And before me, Scott Hennig gave Ed Stelmach hell. And after me, Paige McPherson and Colin Craig gave Rachel Notley and Jason Kenney hell. I don't know. Is this stuff got any value? I guess it attaches a little political cost to repeal this stuff or amend this stuff, but doesn't seem to stop anyone from actually running a deficit if you have a balanced budget law.
I think Cory came close to it when he said you wouldn't get this out of the NDP. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that at least the people who pass balanced budget legislation understand that they should be doing that. They should balance the budget.
So at least they're hypocrites when they do it.
Hey, hypocrisy is, what do they say? It's the tribute that vice pays to virtue. They are, when you have somebody like the NDP, for that matter, like the Federal Liberal Party, that just does not believe in balancing budgets, doesn't behave that way, doesn't try to, certainly would never pass a balanced budget act. Well, you know what you're dealing with there. At least these guys, you think to yourself, well, if they could, they would. And we know stuff happens and they probably won't. Nobody ever has stuck by it. But it's better than nothing.
So I guess the highest we can say of it is it's at least a sign that you theoretically care about it.
Yes.
But there's a part of me that almost likes the NDP approach more because at least they're intellectually honest. That when they want to run a deficit, they'll just run a deficit. Conservatives will just...
Derek, you realize you just said the NDP is intellectually honest? I don't think...
When it comes to deficits, yes. Yes, they make no shame about deficits, whereas conservative... Alison Redford had to change the definition of a balanced budget and declared she was running a balanced budget. I remember I was looking through the numbers and was like, okay, you say you're spending let's just pick a number, I don't remember. Let's say you're running a $4 billion surplus. This says here you're You're borrowing $10 billion. How does that work? Oh, well, they just literally changed the definition of it. And I got in this big, long-running fight with them for years. And we're kind of back to some sane math and budget accounting now. But conservatives are hypocritical about this stuff. And they tend to think it's okay for them to run deficits, but not anyone else. Like it was very difficult, I think, for Stephen Harper to successfully criticize Justin Trudeau's plan to run a deficit, because he had run so many big deficits himself. And yes, they'll say, well, circumstances, we had reasons, but everyone's got, excuses are like assholes. Everyone's got one.
Yeah, with Harper, if he had not done what he did, there would have been the three other parties would have forced an election, which Harper would probably have lost.
But then he bragged about running a deficit and how it was a good thing and a necessary thing. He wasn't saying, I'm doing it because they're forcing me to. He says, deficits are good when I run deficits.
Then he restored it to balance before he left office.
For about a month, and it was undone.
Well,
but in the meantime, they had set the political
table. It wasn't him who undid it.
But they had changed the political calculus. They had broken the consensus that had been established across the political spectrum in Canada that deficits were a bad thing. We had a decade in Canada where even the federal NDP wouldn't dare talk about running a deficit.
Well, that was actually one of the peculiar things about the 2015 election, that the NDP were not in favor of a deficit, and the Liberals campaigned on their intentions to run 3 consecutive $10 billion deficits. Remember that?
Just a little
bit of pump priming going on there, But I think it's a school of thought, and I'm not saying I disagree with it when I refer to it as a school of thought, that by the time that governments around the world started introducing deficits in 2008, 2009 to combat the recession of that time, by the time they did it, natural compensators in the system were already starting to kick in. So it was sort of gratuitous. But again, it's the old business of the politics of the day forcing you to do things that your political inclinations don't want to do. Harper was not a deficit guy.
No.
He felt forced to do it.
Sure, but then by embracing it enthusiastically, when he eventually did embrace it,
what are you going to say?
He eventually embraced it. He didn't just say, I have no choice but to. He embraced it, and I think that's what destroyed the balanced budget consensus in the country, which is still not even close to restored at this point.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's balanced budget legislation. Let's talk about the guts of the budget itself. So there's a surplus, $2.4 billion. It's nice, but I feel like it should be a lot bigger than that, considering the increase in revenues, because there's been very significant increases in spending. 4.1% increase in health, which is the single biggest line item in the budget. 5.2%.
That's over 3 years.
Yeah. 5.2 billion though for education. 5.2% for education. That's the second biggest line item in the budget. So the big increase in spending. Now, to be fair, there is some in there on debt repayment, but the debt repayment number is more nebulous. It's saying, we're going to take a certain proportion of the surplus over the year, and that goes to debt repayment. But increased spending got firm numbers. They got X billions of dollars for spending. Debt repayment didn't quite get that. Now, it'll probably be significant if oil prices hold up. And to their credit, they budgeted very conservatively on those oil prices. Remember what number was it?
78, wasn't it?
I think that rings a bell. Yeah. 78 or close to $78. And what's the spot price today? A lot higher than 78. So they're budgeting, I think, pretty reasonably. Maybe even some would say even over conservatively in their oil price estimates, which means we're probably not going to get any big surprises this year unless peace breaks out. So start with your overall thoughts on the budget itself. You got the balance right, or is just kind of a big spending pre-election budget?
So, well, it certainly is a pre-election budget. There's no question about that. Look, with respect to revenues, there's this great little year-over-year chart that you can get in the back of the budget, page 164 for the bean counters out there.
In the fiscal reference tables. That's my favorite part.
That's right. And so we've got, they've got revenues, total revenues here for this year at $76 billion, whereas budgeted for the year to come 70.6. So they're budgeting for $5.5 billion less in revenue. Now, when my wife and I sit down and do the household accounts, we look at the same kinds of numbers. There aren't so many zeros after them, but we figure, well, what are we going to do with this? And so then if you go down to the expenses, after all, well, there was this much for health and that much for education and so forth. At the bottom line on the education, on the expenses, is that they're up from 65.6 billion to 68.2. So they're up a couple of $1 billion, all right. No question about it. Less revenue, more expenses. Are the expenses justified? Well, now here's where the value judgments begin. Is it Danielle Smith, Premier, has committed her election prospects to fixing healthcare? After all the redirection of resources that can be made by just saying, okay, you over here, go over there, and there is some of that. And you folks who are taking up beds in hospitals, you need to be out of there and you need to be in this care facility. You can do that. But at the end, if you're going to make any kind of a dent in, for example, all those elective surgeries, 69,000 of them that are waiting, you're going to need doctors, nurses, and probably ambulance drivers. So if you're going to make a dent, how are you going to do it? Even if you put it out to private medicine, as she has, some of it, you're still going to pay the bills
unless we allow private insurance.
Now
That would bring in money without taxpayer support.
Would you run this election on that promise?
Oh, hell no. There's a reason I'm not a politician. I'm saying, but if you really want to fix healthcare,
you're not wrong, by the way.
We've been throwing money at this stuff forever. More money. Sure, you could do more with more money, but it's pretty diminishing returns at this point. If you really want to do it, you want to bring in more money without raising taxes, you got to bring in private insurance. And I have under no illusions that is a terrible election idea, even in Alberta, where we have a higher tolerance threshold for private health care. I don't think people are quite ready to go there yet.
Well, they've been told they're not ready to go there, so they tend to think that they're not ready to go there. But if back in the Ralph Klein days, if instead of Klein bringing in Bill 11 and making it illegal to run a private medical facility in Alberta, he had said, we will put out a tax break, bring your medical facilities here, and you can just bid for government work. Mm-hmm. Our bills would be a lot lower. No, I know there's arguments against it.
So I don't
believe them.
We're quickly turning into a discussion on just healthcare, but we'll get your thoughts, Cory, on the overall budget. I know healthcare is a big part of it, so every budget always turns into at least somewhat of a discussion on healthcare. But there's a not insubstantial increase in spending here. But it's not just spending. There's debt repayment as well. Your overall thoughts on the budget?
I for an election budget, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, I expected this. I know that Premier Smith is a fiscal conservative. I'm sure if she thought she could win in May by holding the line on spending or even cutting it a little, she would. But you're buying the love of Albertans for an upcoming election. And I noticed that practically every single line item has an increase, but they're modest ones. Actually, they're not huge. She's not going mad with it. And for healthcare, for example, as Nigel said, it's gone up, but it's not a massive increase. I mean, but it's taking a lot of bullets out of Rachel Notley's gun. Because, I mean, they can't point it anywhere and say, you cut this, or you didn't increase this, or you're starving this, because she's increased it a little bit everywhere. So, again, it's, the looking at the pragmatism versus principle, as much as a fiscal conservative, I think we could get by with a quarter less spending and the world wouldn't end. But I also know it would be electoral suicide. So I think it was a fairly reasoned budget. Being careful with oil forecasting, and they've always done that. Ralph Klein used to do it too, because you look great if it comes in above, because now you got this extra money. If it comes in below, you're not into a budget disaster. So you do those modest forecasts. So it was a good hold the line election budget.
So actually, you raised a good point, which I think was a point of discussion here. The NDP's reaction to it. They didn't really have a lot they can do. But you remember before the last election, Rachel Notley would say the UCP is going to slash and burn. I think that was their terms. Slash and burn. They're going to gut and devastate government services and blah, blah, blah. Jason Kenney ran on more or less holding the line on spending, modest increases, and lo and behold, that's actually one of the areas where he did what he said he was going to do. They more or less just held the line on spending, and Rachel Notley has been sitting there kind of spinning her wheels. They keep on claiming that the UCP is going to gut and slash. I mean, I'm not in charge of the government. It doesn't seem like that's something they're going to do, but I don't know. Are there any openings for the NDP here?
I don't think so. Well, not in this budget. No, I don't know what they would be if there were. I mean, that you didn't spend enough. Well, we spent what we had. What did you spend it on? We put most of it into health. Isn't that what you've been saying should happen? Hard to really see where Mrs. Notley would go with that. And you'll notice that her reaction was not "it's wrong." It's that you can't trust. In other words, if I could trust her, it was okay.
Yeah.
But she'll never deliver what she's promising. Oh, all right. I think the jury's out on that. Smith's only been there for 5 months. People are going to make that judgment in a couple of years.
Okay. Well, we're going to switch up a little, move to Ottawa.
Oh.
So this has been building for some time. There was a CSIS report leaked that shows that the Chinese were very clearly and deliberately trying to interfere in at least the last two federal elections, and have had at least some modest success with that. I think there was one Liberal in the Greater Toronto area. I can't remember. What's his name?
Handong.
And he was quite clearly targeted to be supported by the Chinese Communist Party. There were certain Chinese conservatives who were targeted to lose because they were Chinese. That's the most dangerous to the Chinese. They probably don't care if some cracker like me is there, because I'm probably not going to greatly influence Chinese policy one way or another. They target ethnic Chinese and help those who are at least perceived as supportive of the CCP, and attack those who are seen as hostile to the CCP. And so this has been building for some time. Now we have word, that the Chinese communists were flowing money into the Trudeau Foundation, and even tried, although I guess they didn't get, but even tried to lobby for the Trudeau Foundation to build them a statue of Mao in Montreal, I guess, something like that. But this has been building, and it's becoming apparent that this is not a little thing. Now the Liberals have said, well, the reports say that it did not influence the outcome of the election, and I could probably buy it, that Chinese support of certain primarily Liberal candidates didn't result in the Liberals winning overall more seats than the Conservatives. But it seems to have clearly compromised the Liberals, that the Liberals now have a vested political interest in China, and China in the Liberals, and did sway at least a few seats. It didn't change who was in government, but it has changed the makeup of the government and the makeup of Parliament. Cory, I'll start with you. Liberal, regardless of party, governments don't like calling public inquiries into themselves. It's a bad things come of it. There's a parliamentary committee going on to these things, but parliamentary committees, I've been on one, you're there for the cameras. You might try to get to a little bit, but it's mostly you're there to score points, and the MPs or MLAs are trying to score points on the questioner, and the questioner is trying to score points back, or at least play defense. Not much. They can't really compel evidence the same way as a commission. Do you think, at the end of the day, do you think the Liberals are going to be forced to call an inquiry here? Or do you think they're going to be able to hold out?
Wish I knew. I think they absolutely should. I mean, this is so serious, and the evidence is already so compelling that we really need to blow the lid off this thing and find out just how deep it is and what's going on. But this party just never seems to cease to surprise with its indifference to accountability, and the electorate seems to be okay with it. I mean, I'm really getting frustrated with people in general. I mean, you've had a foreign rogue nation meddling with your elections. We should be protesting in the streets. Prime Minister Trudeau is shut down questioning, saying you're a racist if you even talk about it. Mm-hmm. And it looks to me like the public's already starting to shrug. The parliamentary committee, yeah, they're beating back and forth. I watched an NDP member. I tortured myself in the newsroom with the TV with it on the committee. The NDP member gets up and says, so let's talk about the Russian influence on the convoy. Well, what on earth does that have to do with Mr. Dong? They're just spinning their wheels in there.
Well, the only evidence of any Russian interference in the convoy was a CBC reporter saying claiming there was, and is later having to retract it because there was none.
And this is profoundly serious, and it could explain a lot of the reasons why. I mean, and people have noted that for years. The Trudeau government is terribly weak when it comes to dealing with China, and maybe the chairman of China knew about some of the influence, has some evidence of things, and Mr. Trudeau, we're going to squeeze harder unless you do this or that. They don't have to win the whole election.
Squeezing with your hands.
His foot.
An orange, obviously.
Yes. So it's. But either way, that just
Nico,
because
put that one in the file for the starfish.
if they don't have to have fully influenced the election or won it to have gained a lot of influence on the government itself, and yes, they could be. They're not winning every seat, but they're squeezing the grapes of power, and that could influence
Squeezing
policy.
the grapes of power.
All right, I'll back off.
Did you coin
now.
that phrase, or is that from something else?
No, I just coined that one for now.
Squeezing the grapes of
power.
that sounds like a good column headline right there.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. So, Cory referenced what Trudeau said, more or less saying, well, you're racist against Chinese people. Actually, the victims of Chinese influence in Canada are mostly other Chinese people. Of course, no community, despite progressive ideology, minority communities are not homogenous and no one speaks for them, and there's going to be diversity within it. Obviously, there's going to be some are sympathetic to the CCP. Most Chinese I've met are clearly not, and they're the victims of this kind of thing. But Mr. How do you say his name?
Dong?
Han Dong?
Yeah.
Okay. Cory was squeezing the dong.
Just the grapes.
The grapes.
Somebody else get the dong.
Squeezing his grapes. Okay.
No, let it go, guys. Let it go.
Okay. He, one reporter noted, I forget where, but they did some good, just quick little search of the voting record in Parliament. And you'll remember, not that long ago, there was a vote in Parliament, the House of Commons, condemning the genocide of Uyghur Muslims in Western China. And Mr. Dong was in Parliament that day, voting before that resolution and voting after that resolution, but was mysteriously absent during the vote condemning the Chinese Communist Party's genocide of Uyghur Muslims. And so I don't know. Are we racist for mentioning his voting record and that he was directly targeted for support by the CCP?
Of course. I mean, that's just the default Trudeau response to any problem, is to try and look for an angle so that he can call his accusers or his questioners racist. And I think that's what probably offends me most about the whole situation, is not that the Chinese are trying to influence our politics. That goes on all the time.
Of course they're trying.
It has gone on for decades.
It's what they do.
The Czechoslovakian people tried to influence British politics in the 1930s to get us on side. There's a history of this.
And the Americans have almost certainly tried to manipulate our politics at times. It'd be crazy not to.
Certainly, and everybody else's as well. If you go back since the war, look, that we know it goes on. It's what response do we want from our leaders when they are told about it? The response we got was not, okay, thanks, guys. That was good work. We'll take it from here. It was, well, it's not up to the security agencies to say who we can and can't run as a candidate. I don't think anybody ever suggested that it ought to be, but they did say, you look over here, sir, look over there, look over there. You have some foreign influence going on here, which you may want to be aware of. And for that, they got their ears scorched. That is not leadership. That is not a prime minister who's got the interests of the country at heart. So
I think we're pretty settled on the table. Should there be a public inquiry? Of course there should be. But I'll put the same question to you as I put to Cory. Do you think at the end of the day the Liberals will agree to one, kicking and screaming? They obviously don't want to have one. it's never good news for the government. And I'm not. It's not necessarily the case that the Liberals would welcome Chinese help, limited or widespread, whatever it is. But it taints your victory to some extent. And they've said one Liberal MP said, referring to this all as Trumpian. In fact, although I think she's mixing it up, it was actually the Clintons who accused the Trump campaign of receiving foreign influence from Putin. That's actually what happened. But do you think at the end of the day we're going to get a public inquiry on this one?
Depends what Jagmeet Singh reckons it would do for his chances. He's the one guy who's got the leverage to make this happen. I mean, we can have Dick Fadden, we can have even Jerry Butts saying it's really time, but that doesn't force the Prime Minister's hand. But if his key parliamentary ally can find it in himself for reasons good or bad to demand it, that I think would change things. It's up to Mr. Singh.
I think you're probably right. All right. Well, we're going to call it quits there. Remember, if you're not yet already a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandard.news, click on membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year to get you complete access past the Western Standard's paywall to all of our content. As you know, the Western Standard refuses to accept the federal government's media bailout subsidies, and we need you to support the work we do to continue in operation here. Also, if you're watching or listening to us on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble right now, make sure you also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Just look up Western Standard News, and you'll get access to all our shows, including Corey's wonderful times. He's got some great stuff. That's it for me, Nigel. Corey.
Great to be here.
Happy St. David's Day. I had a side influence on my opinion on that.
What's St. David's Day?
Welsh.
Welsh?
Yes.
West England. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much, and God save the king.
We're all the way up to -8 in Lethbridge today, and here's what commodities are doing. Cash barley is unchanged at $4.15. Feed wheat is down $2 at $4.28. And corn is down $5 at $4.25 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, May Minneapolis futures slipped 5 1/4 cents to $8.61, with local hard red spring bid for April movement at $11.20 per bushel. Looking at canola, nearby futures are higher 90 cents at $8.19.20 per ton, with delivered buys from March-April movement at $18.12 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentil prices are unchanged at 33 cents per pound, and yellow peas remain at $12.50 per bushel. And in the cattle markets, April live cattle are lowered 40 cents at $165.08 per hundredweight. For more information on pricing or picked up options, give me a call at 403-394-1711. I'm Matt Busicum at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month.